Watch WTTW live 24/7, wherever you are. Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by viewers like you and by the following.
Former White Sox pitcher and announcer Ed Farmer was thrown the biggest curveball of his life when he was told the only thing that could save him was organ donation.
My brother Tom, he's the guy that gave me my life back because I was dying. 3 more days, I was going to be gone.
Ed lived nearly 30 years because of the kidney donation. His legacy will live on through the White Sox and this life-saving program. Join the Illinois Secretary of State's Organ Tissue Donor Registry.
I always say heaven knows you can't take them with you.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center.
I'm Helena Bonham Carter. My grandparents weren't conventional war heroes.
She was always ahead of the game.
What he did was quite remarkable.
It's exciting because it brings him back again. My grandparents' war.
Sunday at 7 on WTTW.
He has a swashbuckling quality.
Absolute miracles.
Oh, prose.
The Merritts didn't have a chance.
He's an odd bird.
How can you not be obsessed about death?
The man is much more interesting than the myth.
Hemingway.
Monday at 8 on WTTW. Tonight's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Mollenhauer Progressive Philanthropic Fund in honor of Ida Mollenhauer, supporting quality journalism.
Hi, I'm David, and you're watching WTTW Chicago.
Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment, but first to some of today's top stories. One United States Capitol Police officer is dead after an altercation with an attacker who rammed his car into a Capitol barrier. The fallen officer has been identified as William Evans, an 18-year member of the police force. Capitol Police officials say the attacker has also died and another officer is injured. They say the alleged attacker exited the car with a knife after hitting the barrier outside of the Capitol. The U.S. Capitol was on lockdown, and officials say there is no specific threat at this point.
Suspect did start lunging toward U.S. Capitol Police officers, at which time U.S. Capitol Police officers fired upon the suspect.
As we mentioned, the U.S. Capitol was on lockdown after the incident earlier this afternoon. At this point, it is opened back up. Police Oversight Agency says it will release video of the fatal police-involved shooting of a 13-year-old Little Village resident. In a statement, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability says COPA has determined certain provisions of state law intended to protect the confidentiality of juvenile records do not prohibit the agency's release of material related to its investigation of a Chicago police officer's fatal shooting of 13-year-old Adam Toledo. This comes after both Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown and Mayor Lori Lightfoot called for that video's release, and one day after Brown revealed that the incident early Monday morning involved a 13-year-old. We'll have more on this story in just a bit. Updated air travel restrictions from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention today. The CDC guidelines state that anyone fully vaccinated for COVID-19 can travel within the United States without providing a negative COVID test, and they do not need to self-quarantine upon their return from travel. Now, the CDC says it still discourages non-essential air travel and considers fully vaccinated to mean 2 weeks after receiving the second COVID shot or 2 weeks after the sole Johnson & Johnson shot. And Illinois public health officials report more than 3,200 new cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours and 24 additional deaths. That makes for a total of more than 1.25 million cases and 21,349 total deaths. The test positivity rate is at 3.5%. Governor J.B. Pritzker signs a bill restoring certain collective bargaining rights for the Chicago Teachers Union, this despite Mayor Lightfoot's objections. The law allows the CTU to expand what it can bargain over, including class size, layoffs, and the duration of the school year. We'll have much more on this story in just a bit as well. Sad news for Loyola basketball fans. It looks like head coach Porter Moser is moving on. Moser is reportedly set to become the next head coach at the University of Oklahoma on a reported 6-year deal. Moser leaves Loyola after leading the program to multiple NCAA tournament appearances, including this year's Sweet 16 and 2018's Final Four run. Sister Jean just couldn't work her magic to keep Moser around. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are A.D. Quigg of Crane Chicago Business, Cheryl Corley of NPR, Patrick Smith of WBEZ, and our very own Heather Sharon. Let's get right into it. Cheryl Corley, we mentioned the deadly attack at the U.S. Capitol. 1 police officer dead. The alleged suspect is also dead. Do we know anything else about the suspect and a potential motive?
Not that I know of at this time. And it's really devastating that we're seeing this happen in, January 6th and now this again. We're going to see, I think, a lot more additional protection around all of the institutions in D.C. We see these kinds of really tragedies happening.
And this came as lawmakers were debating some of those barriers around the Capitol, but clearly still safety issues there. As you see, the National Guard was called. Let's move closer to home with this shooting, this fatal police-involved shooting of a 13-year-old boy. Patrick Smith, just today, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability says, after a bit of a delay, it will release any and all body cam video related to this shooting. When do you think that will come?
Well, it seems like it's going to be at least a week, if not more. I spoke with the spokesman for the Civilian Office of Police Accountability today, who said the process here is really they're still collecting video evidence, is what he said. There's a body camera video from the officer that shows the shooting, but he said they're still collecting, maybe private surveillance footage, other kind of video like that. Then they're going to have a meeting with the family to show the videos to them, and only then will it be released to the public. So, we're looking at a week or a couple weeks. An attorney for the boy's family today said that viewing would happen next week. The spokesman said that is not for sure. They have not set a date yet. He doesn't know if it'll be next week or in the weeks after that.
And there's a lot of confusion about this case, Heather Sharon. I mean, we had learned about a police-involved shooting Monday, and just yesterday, Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown comes out with a statement revealing that it was involving a 13-year-old boy. What else do we know about what happened?
Well, we know that police arrived on the scene where the boy was shot because they were alerted by what's called a shot spotter system. This is big microphones that are in certain neighborhoods in the city that suffer from gun violence that alert the police that shots have been fired and that they should get there and to see what happened. So when the officers responded, they found the boy and they found another man who was not injured in the police shooting, but he was taken into custody. It's not clear, though, what prompted the confrontation. It is not clear that the boy was armed. We don't know really anything more about that, which I think is why there's been such an outcry to get that body cam video to see what happened. And this, of course, is complicated by the fact that the victim in this case was so incredibly young, and we learned today that he's a little village resident and that he was, went to the local school and at one point wanted to become a police officer himself, which I think redefines the word ironic.
And David Brown saying that this is a police superintendent's worst nightmare, is a police-involved shooting involving a minor. And this comes as 2 reports related to the Chicago Police Department are released this week. First, A.D. Quigg, the independent monitor that is overseeing the consent decree process, says the police department is doing a little bit better in terms of its compliance, but still has a ways to go. The city is spinning it as sort of a positive report. Is that a fair representation?
It's positive in the sense that it's better than the last report, but negative in the sense that CPD is not improving on the things that it needs to improve on. And one of the big ones is community engagement. And we're seeing that this week with the outrage over this case in the Little Village. The other stuff they're struggling with includes record keeping, which we heard about during the last report. CPD is not turning in its homework on time. Sometimes they're turning over reams and reams of documents with only 2 weeks before their deadline, and that gives the monitor very little time to go over it. The mayor emphasized that this is a marathon, not a sprint. But as someone who campaigned and ran on police reform, seeing results like this isn't quite living up to that pledge.
Yeah, and it seemed like a third of deadlines that the CPD has to meet to be in compliance are actually being met. Patrick Smith, are there signs that CPD is going to improve its performance here, and what's the fallout?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. There are some signs that things are getting better. I think it really depends on how you're reading this report, because AD is exactly right. There's a ton of missed deadlines. There's a ton of really broken promises that are outlined in this report. It is the best report so far. The consent decree has been in place for about 2 years. I've been reading these reports by the monitor. This is the first time that a report has sounded even a little bit hopeful, sort of, about the progress that the police department has made. I certainly heard the line from police officials, that same marathon, not a sprint line. The city, I think, is going to be pushing that. As far as what the consequences will be, it's hard to know. There's been so much turnover already at CPD, including at the Office of Constitutional Policing. The former head, Deputy Chief Barbara West, she retired. That was, reportedly, she said that was her own choice. It's hard to know. They missed a lot of deadlines. They missed a lot of things. You wonder if the turnover is because of that. I'm not sure if this is a sign the new leadership is working or not, but I read at least a little bit of sign of hope in the latest report.
And Patrick, not too much hope, though, in the city's homicide numbers. If you look at the first quarter release, it's worse than last year by a lot, and last year was far worse than the year before that. How come we're not hearing more sort of siren bells about this?
That's another really great question. I mean, part of it is, honestly, there's just so much else going on. We're talking about this police shooting. Obviously, COVID-19 is hanging over everything. I think people are a little bit distracted. Maybe we in the media are even a little bit distracted from this, because you're absolutely right. The numbers are worse than they were at this point last year. And last year, we all looked at as just this horrific aberration, or we hoped it was an aberration. I spoke with experts at the end of last year who said, oh, this is probably just an aberration and it'll get better. So far, the early returns are not good. And I think as we get into the warmer months, and I mean, we hope this doesn't happen, but likely things will get even worse, you're going to see more and more attention on that.
A lot of concern about that. Also this week, Heather Sharon, the Inspector General, puts out a report about CPD's use of a gang database. What did that report find?
Well, 2 years ago, Inspector General Joe Ferguson found that database was actually 18 databases, was riddled with errors, ripe for abuse, and it was disproportionately targeting Black and Latino Chicagoans. This follow-up audit released this week found that the police department continues to use that data, regardless of the fact that they have admitted that it is completely worthless in some cases, with people older than 100 and younger than 5 sometimes listed in the database, and that this police department hasn't really done anything to create a new system. This is another situation that I think is politically perilous for Mayor Lightfoot, because she campaigned on changing this database, about making it not so that it was something that a president like Donald Trump could use to deport undocumented immigrants, which was the center of a huge lawsuit that the city filed. So this is a really big issue that the mayor has not yet been asked about in public, but that she will have to be called to account for, because this is another issue that has to be addressed.
And the police superintendent, again, David Brown, saying that in September they will have a revised gang database system. Let's move on to the trial of Derek Chauvin, accused of murder in the death of George Floyd. A lot of dramatic witness testimony in this trial this week. Today, Lieutenant Richard Zimmerman was on the stand testifying that Chauvin's actions were, quote, totally unnecessary. Let's take a listen to that.
Pulling him down to the ground, face down, and putting your knee on the neck for that amount of time is just uncalled for. I saw no reason why the officers felt they were in danger, if that's what they felt. And that's what they would have to feel to be able to use that kind of force.
Cheryl, you've been covering this in Minneapolis for NPR. Also testimony this week from George Floyd's girlfriend, from bystander, from emergency personnel who were not able to even get access to try and resuscitate George Floyd. What stood out to you on the stand this week?
Well, this has been such an emotional roller coaster of a trial with so many people testifying. I think that what really stood out, in addition to the personal testimony, is the amount of videotape that has actually been used during this trial. It's just been a mountain of it. And, you know, we all know about the videotape of George Floyd being under the knee of Derek Chauvin, but we've seen videotape of George Floyd inside a grocery store, being like an ordinary customer. We've seen extensive amounts of police body cam, where you get this really impactful, just harrowing view of him being, struggling to get him into a car, and then him ending up on the ground, and seeing that over and over in kind of the worst kind of Groundhog Day video that you can imagine. And so those are some of the things that stand out. And I think that also the attempt that the prosecution has tried to really kind of humanize George Floyd, and that with the testimony of George Floyd's girlfriend, talking about, how he was a playful man, friendly man, loved playing sports, doing exercises, playing sports with kids, that sort of thing. But also talking about the drug addiction that she shared with him, in an effort, I think, to get out in front of what they expect the defense to do, since in their opening statements, they talked about, how perhaps it was the drug use and the health issues that George Floyd may have been plagued with that were the cause of the death, and not the knee of Derek Chauvin.
They were talking about they had started opioids for pain, and they had become addicted. And some of the prosecution questioning this week was along those lines, trying to make the case that he had drugs in his system. You're in Minneapolis. What is the tenor of the town right now after all it's gone through with this case?
Well, I think, it's a lot of it's COVID, so a lot of people are still inside. But, I think that it's a little tense. I think people are waiting really to see what is going to happen with this case. That there is a verdict to come. And so I think people are trying to wait and see what is going to happen with that.
And officials in Chicago trying to wait and see, too. I mean, depending on what the verdict is, it could spark a reaction here in Chicago. Patrick Smith, are officials worried about any kind of unrest should the verdict not appear to deliver justice here?
Well, I heard from CPD and OEMC who said they are, they're following the trial, they're monitoring it and looking for the outcome, that they are prepared to deploy officers and other resources, downtown or wherever there might be action. I did spend some time this week talking with activists here in Chicago who said they are watching this case in Minneapolis closely. They feel almost an obligation to, even though it's very difficult to watch and follow sometimes, and that they are planning and expect actions, demonstrations when an outcome is reached.
And it kind of reminds me of the Jason Van Dyke case and the situation there where the charge was a lesser charge than was initially brought. It was second-degree murder, which was some measure of justice. And here in the Derek Chauvin case, you've got 3 charges here, 2 murder charges and a manslaughter charge. So multiple bites at the apple, so to speak, for prosecutors to get a conviction. Cheryl Corley, what are you looking for next week?
Well, we're looking for more probably expert testimony. The head of the police department here in Minneapolis is on the witness list, and he may be coming, which is kind of extraordinary. We've seen a couple of police officers now testifying against now former police officer, but you don't see that often. So, we're expecting that to happen next week.
All right, let's move on to the COVID-19 situation. Cases are surging again, up 45% on average this week. Here's a clip from the mayor earlier this week on that increase.
That's a quantum leap from where we were even 3 weeks ago. That is concerning, and that is obviously dictating that we have to proceed with caution as we open up. We're not going to see anything more significant in the reopening front until we see those numbers stabilize and start to come down.
80 Quig, quantum leap, most of it's coming from some near north side and northwest side zip codes, most of it 18 to 39-year-olds. Restaurants have increased capacity in the last month under the new city rules. Are these things all interconnected?
I think so. I think Heather reached that conclusion earlier this week with the story she wrote about, here we are reopening something, and about a month later we see a pretty scary surge of this number of these COVID cases, of percent positivity, and daily average cases getting closer to those scary thresholds, 5% positivity and more than 400 cases a day. But the mayor has said over and over, these industries are essentially on life support, and we need to do what we can to support them, even if that means opening carefully. Now, she says the city can do certain targeted measures to try to educate people. But of course, we also saw this week opening day for the Cubs. 8,000 people flooding into the very neighborhoods that are seeing the highest percent positivity rates. So I think trying to balance this is difficult, but it's definitely going to keep us from that next bridge phase that the governor has been pushing for a few weeks, because we are seeing hospitalizations go up. We are seeing these numbers trend up, and there's no sign of them plateauing anytime soon.
Heather Sharon, if you were to read the tea leaves, would you anticipate the mayor announcing any kind of rollbacks, either in that 50% indoor dining threshold or even crowds at Sox Park and Wrigley Field?
Well, I left my crystal ball in the other room, unfortunately. But
well, go and get it. We'll give you some time.
But I think that AD is right. Is that the mayor has been saying, I don't want to do this. I want to let businesses stay open. But we are approaching that 5% positivity rate, which means that the virus is spreading uncontrollably in Chicago, and that imperils not only people's businesses but also the schools. There are certain metrics that the city has agreed to if the COVID metrics meet, they will shut down schools for a period of time, and that would be very serious. So I would tend to think that the mayor would be more willing to take other actions before having to close schools, since she fought for so many months to get them open, going at it with the Chicago Teachers Union. But the fact of the matter is as I wrote this week, we have seen time and again that businesses have reopened and COVID cases have surged. And it's not rocket science, but it is another example of Groundhog Day, where if you open businesses, people will think it is safe, even if it actually isn't. And even if they're trying to follow all the rules, they can still get COVID. Especially young people, as it turns out. AD Quig, there's been more news involving Loretto Hospital this week. You reported about a state lawmaker, Camille Lilly, who also works at Loretto Hospital, having her own VIP list of vaccination. Who is on this list?
So there was no necessarily clouded folks. She wasn't handing these out to Cook County judges or folks, or Eric Trump, for example. But we did obtain lists of 85 names of people that we were told Camille Lilly gave to leadership at Loretto and said vaccinate these people. We also heard that those people would often bring others. And the hospital said in response, she's the chief external affairs officer. It is her job to reach out to the community and try to get in touch and connect people with shots. But we can't ignore that she is a lawmaker, and it is politically beneficial for her to be connecting people with these shots. And we don't know exactly how she connected with these people to get them shots. We are expecting an internal audit from Loretto to come out perhaps next week. The mayor has called for an independent audit from someone else. It doesn't sound like the hospital is going to do that, but of course we've had this drip, drip, drip of Loretto stories, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw stories from perhaps other hospitals or vaccinators. But the problem is, the only reason we're finding out about these is because of tips. The other vaccination scandal we've had recently was with Innovative Express Care giving doses allocated to CPS employees to other folks. And the city only found out about it because of tips. So I'll be interested to see if the city maybe starts doing its own spot audits of their vaccinators, or doing a little bit more quality control to ensure that vaccines are going to the people and the places they're supposed to.
And as I understand, the Chicago Department of Public Health is working with Loretto on this internal review, but the mayor has called for an independent review here. We'll see what comes out next week. And also this week, the news that CEO George Miller was suspended without pay for a couple weeks. We only have a few minutes here. Let's get to some political news. President Joe Biden announces his $2.3 trillion infrastructure plan alongside calls for bipartisanship. Governor Pritzker signs a bill restoring the Chicago Teachers Union ability to bargain over a wide range of issues. A former Democratic state lawmaker and ComEd lobbyist is charged with federal tax evasion, and Alderman Ed Burke's trial moves slowly. The next hearing is not scheduled until July 29th. First, Heather Sharon, we alluded to this at the top, a bill signed by Governor Pritzker that expands what the Chicago Teachers Union can bargain over. This is something that Mayor Lightfoot did not want. Why did Pritzker sign it?
Well, he signed it because he campaigned on this issue, and this has been among the top priorities of the Chicago Teachers Union dating back to 1995, when they were limited in what they could bargain for after a series of repeated strikes. This was also when the state legislature gave the mayor of Chicago control of the school district. So this has been an issue for a long time. This was finally at the point where they had a supermajority of Democrats in the General Assembly and a Democratic governor, and they were able to get it done. I don't know that they expected that they would have to do so over the objections of a self-proclaimed progressive mayor, but that's exactly what happened, because this debate really sort of reached its apex in the midst of the mayor trying to reopen the schools to in-person learning at sort of the height of the COVID pandemic. She asked them not to do that. The Senate passed the bill anyway, and now 60 days later, it is law. And it's really the capstone to the career of Karen Lewis, the former president of the Chicago Teachers Union, who died in February. She worked on this. This was, her number one goal for many, many years, and it will really reshape the relationship between the teachers union and the mayor, which was pretty low to begin with.
Right.
And now the teachers union has a great deal more leverage in terms of what they're allowed legally to strike for.
All right, only a few seconds left. Cheryl Corley, President Biden outlines his infrastructure plan this week. Already some partisan pushback. Do you believe there will be any kind of bipartisan final bill here?
Well, it's going to be tough. I think so. I mean, he has the votes in one house, of course, but the Senate is right there, and I'm reluctantly optimistic, or
that there might be some modicum of bipartisanship, but
maybe. But I think it's just going to be a difficult road to go. Even though infrastructure, everybody knows we need it, but. We'll see.
Tends to be a bipartisan issue, but nothing is bipartisan anymore in Washington. We're out of time, so our thanks to A.D. Quigg, Cheryl Corley, Patrick Smith, and Heather Sharon. And that is our show for this Friday night. Don't forget you can get Chicago Tonight and the Week in Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And be sure to join us tomorrow night at 6 for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, and 6 p.m. Sunday for Chicago Tonight Black Voices. And on those shows, we'll be debating President Biden's immigration policy, and we talk with some of Chicago's new black arts leaders about how the local theater scene is planning a comeback. And then Chicago Tonight is back all week next week at our regular time, 7 o'clock. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and have a great weekend.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Office.